one of the big takeaways, I guess, on this, and I'll tell you a little bit about how Canada works as a country. We're probably the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a federal government mandate for education. We don't have a Department of Education. We have all educational activity is the responsibility of individual provinces, which means anytime the federal government gets interested in learning or uses the word learning, provinces start to get irritated because they have control over education. And I think on some ways it has some positives to it. You know, we have exceptional success rate against international metrics as a country. We have the highest percentage of all the countries that are tracked in this, the highest percentage of academic completion for post-secondary education. Just under 50% of the country has some level of post-secondary education. So there's some things that work well with the system. The problem is it's tough to get a strategy and move it forward because no one's going to fund the strategy because there's no federal department. So you might go with a big province, a wealthy province like Ontario or Alberta, and they can move it forward to a certain degree, but it's not something that you can impact broadly across the country. Now, you probably don't have those exact same problems within Puerto Rico. I'm assuming that there's better divisional, sharing across different regions, and the fact that you probably don't have different governments in different parts of your state or country, depending on perspective. So I think the challenge here that I would recommend, based on the experience of the illustration I mentioned with the doctoral seminar, of a sense of what is it that you want and who's going to do what when things clear. The second thing, based on the outcome of this particular workshop that we ran, different weeks of focus, I would definitely encourage you to have a look at some of the background reading documents from different regions of the world so you gain a sense of how are other countries funding e-learning development as a strategy. It's, in fairness, changing because a lot of federal governments, if you look at UK, for example, they're expecting dramatic cuts to their higher education sector because they're entering an age of austerity now to try and reduce their deficit. So it's difficult to say that, oh, look what UK did, it's brilliant, because what UK did is now being dismantled to some regard. You have other countries, give an illustration of Portugal. They have a laptop rollout program where every student in kindergarten receives a laptop in the country. It's called the Magellan Project. And the impact of that is uncertain because if you have an e-learning research agenda, it's important that you evaluate your e-learning research agenda. What was the outcome? What was the impact of these innovations that we adopted in terms of teaching and learning? So Portugal isn't there yet. They're actively trying to make sense of it because you have the content that needs to be developed and digitized. You have the laptops, whichever kindergarten student receives, and then you have the need for teacher development because just because you give students laptops doesn't mean teachers learn. And so I think that's a bit of a challenge they face as well. How do you evaluate that down the road? At what point do you say, if I was in Portugal right now as a researcher, I would say there's lots of research opportunities. What are the impact of laptops in terms of the general sense of competence on individual students? What is the value of a laptop program in terms of how does it flow into the family household? What's the impact on laptop use in school in terms of the impact at home? There was a study that was done with OECD, and they looked at and they concluded that the impact of technology was actually greater when there was computer use at home than if there was computer availability at school. So what was more important was having a computer at home than having one at school. Makes sense, because at school the teacher tells you what to do with a laptop. At home, you go, you explore, you learn however you're inclined, in theory. So anyway, taking those lessons, the first one being, again, make sure you know roughly what you want to get into. Second one, considering what is it that's being done in other countries and how well does that translate into our context, because you likely have unique needs and unique considerations, no doubt financial constraints. But there are, I believe at this point, I'm aware of at least 4 or 5 countries that have national laptop initiatives for students. That's nationally rolled out. based on the Magellan project. I believe it was Venezuela that picked up on this. Peru, I think, went with an one laptop per child model, and Spain, in not in the entire country, but definitely regions of it, are doing a broad rollout of laptops as well. So it's good to know what are they doing, because now you don't have to blaze that trail yourself, and you can start to ask a few individuals in these regions, what's the impact, what kind of research questions are you asking? So if you begin to craft an e-learning agenda for your a research agenda for your across the system, you have some resources you can turn to rather than having to dig everything up from ground zero. Another model, and again, I just want to emphasize, feel free to have a look at the site, because there are additional discussions and topics and resources that you may want to look at that came out of this in terms of general benefit on thinking what a strategy looks like. Final point before I turn it back over to you. This is what e-learning looks like when it's developed at a national level and when it's rolled out strategically and thoughtfully. And it's also what it looks like when you reduce learning to a heavy technology process. There's parts that I absolutely love about this, and there's parts that scare me about this. This is the Keras model. Now, if you're not familiar with the South Korea, so it's the Korean Education and Research Information Service, and they've done just a spectacular job rolling out and making technology a key part of the curriculum, the entire system, which means that the content that students learn at school is tied to resource and access and help information that they have when they get home. It's not confined only to their interactions while they're at the school system. So Keras is, if you search K-E-R-I-S, that's the link, and it'll take you to this main site. A lot of it's not in English, but you'll be able to find bits and pieces at least. Some of the resources on the side relate to the research and planning end, as well as the e-learning in school education. South Korea was a country that would be really considered a country in poverty, 40 years ago. And the government made a very, I think, tactile or strategic decision to state, we want to be a world leader. And they decided to make their platform for becoming a world leader education and technology. And so they've improved the quality of the education system, and technology is infused across the spectrum of learning. Unfortunately, and I don't think we have enough research quite on this yet, it's a matter of what are, because you need to ask questions about when is technology a good contribution, and sometimes the best technology is no digital technology. Even you think of it, even a building is technology, a pen is technology, but in the sense of digital computers and that, there are times where you don't want that at all. But the Keras model at least is heavily infiltrated from end to end in terms of tech use. But it also means that South Korea has the best quality internet connection in the world. I'm not sure if they still do. I know a couple years ago at least they were there, but they're right up there. It means that they have one of the most digitally literate populations on the planet. And if you feel that the future of education and the future of society is related to knowledge, technology, and the digital environments, then it would suggest that they're very well positioned to compete effectively in the future. By the same account, there are big questions that need to be asked about the impact socially, the impact structurally in terms of society as well. Is technology a net good? In itself, it's not, but how it's deployed can make a dramatic difference. So these are the kinds of questions that I haven't seen answered yet by the Keras project. No doubt they're doing research on some level, but at least at this point I just want to emphasize this is an example of a systemic-wide rollout of technology. There are other illustrations from the readings I listed previously that you might find more interesting on what it looks like in different regions and different countries of the world. Because the key questions become, who funds it? Who's responsible for its successful completion? How are you bringing in contrary voices? Because the way these things work, you roll out a project, somebody stands up at the end, waves, smiles, gets all the recognition for rolling it out, and then 10,000 people who work behind the scenes don't. And the people who, and I remember this experience in Portugal when I was there about 5 years ago talking to someone about their laptop rollout, and I said, well, how are you going to train the teachers to use the computers? And they said, oh, we're working on that. And then when I was there last year, the question, and what was the biggest problem they're coming up with the project? Teachers don't know what to do with the computers that the students now have. Because the effort, even though there was this sense of, yes, we're going to do that, but it didn't happen. You have to define critical areas around research and e-learning and technology rollout and make sure that you meet those critical needs. Because if you have 50 things to do and 3 of them are critical for the success of a project, you have to do those 3 things definitely. The other 47, it's nice if you get to them, but the most important elements are what you'd look at as critical success factors, those things that will make or break a project. And sometimes in planning and getting excited about research activities, the wrong points of focus get emphasized. So I'm not sure if that's of any value to you as you begin your discussion, but I'll turn it back and let you take the conversation in your directions. Thanks.